another lecture tonight with John DeMartin. And I assume you know that you're in for an evening with worms, since you're here. My name is Elliot DeBille. I'm on the board for Friends of the Arcata Marsh, or FOAM, that's sponsoring tonight's talk and the series that we put on here. It's my pleasure to introduce John DeMartin, who's been a professor of zoology, all kinds of biology, for 35 years?
At least.
I've been in education for 25, and I know you've been involved with education at least that long. So John's a busy guy, and please welcome John DeMartin.
Thank you. Well, tonight we're going to deal with parasites of the Arcata Marsh. When I first started putting the program together, I got to the point where I said the order of magnitude of what I'd like to cover was too much, and I thought I would reduce it down to just one group of worms. And for example, after I get through, if you were to say you'd like have a little more worminess, I could always do it at another time. So today we're going to concentrate on one group, but first let's just get warmed up. Now here we're looking at Clock Lake. It's a very, very busy place when it comes to parasitism. Oops. And let's get some definitions down. Parasitism, it's an ism. It has to do with, the presence of characteristics and whatever attributes that we associate with parasites, we can put that under parasitism. And then too, we get into a lot of names, words, description of parts. We're not going to get lost in that tonight, that's for sure. But anyway, I find that it's useful to know what words mean. Just like this morning, I talked with a group of freshmen from Humboldt and made a point. Get used to, when you learn terms, to know what the terms mean, know the roots of the words, and it might help you put other root combinations together, and you'll find that you might feel pretty good at your figuring out a new word. Worm too. Hear it. And then a parasite is an organism, a plant or animal that lives on another plant or animal. In it quite often, or on it, and getting sustenance, and also shelter, particularly if you're an internal parasite. Now, at the bottom there, virtually all free living organisms like us have more than one parasite. Therefore, just mathematically, what does that tell us about the ratio, in general, between the number of parasites in a broad sense to the number of hosts? It's parasites to host is greater than 1 over 1. And trying to maintain that kind of ratio is very, very important in the biology of various creatures. Now let's drive into Arcata Marsh. You come down the road there and you might get greeted by coots. They're worming. Here's one giving me a look. I'm telling it I'm not going to take its worms. And here's Clock Lake. You see various birds out there. Oh, I remember the other September, there were these little peeps that were easy to photograph right up close. Lots of different types of shorebirds. And birds have fancy names, and just offhand, notice that, with the name here, notice that this common, looking at this calidris with calidris over here. So many of the names are based on Greek, and we don't have in Latin a K, and so we have the hard C, so that's one of the changes we find in terms of names. What do we see up here in the trees? They got any birds? What would you call what you see? Don't be free to be involved. They're white, and they're big, and if you drive from here to Eureka, you quite often see them in the fields. The herons, and the gray herons, and then here we have a bird that is a heron, the night heron. I take my pictures with a little camera from a distance so they can be a little blurry. We see a pair of what here? Pelicans, and you can see, if that was called a western pelican, would that sound like a poor common name for it? Offhand to you? What's an occidental? A westerner. So anyway, is associated with the west. And here's something that gives Godward names, days its names out there, bird perching, probably a high tide at this time. And maybe in the ditches around here, you might find something like this, the red-legged frog. Now, for those of you who like language, I have this here. You know, I don't expect you to be picking up on everything, but I just find it useful. Like rana, that's the Italian I know for frog. And Spanish. Here we see the salt marsh around at high tide, and at high tide we find birds up close, not out there in the water feeding, and we have the marbled godwit. And look at the name, the fancy name, Limosa fedoa. I don't know what fedoa means. Sometimes I can't find the meaning, but look at Limosa, full of mud. Whenever I see os at the end of a word, I'm thinking of myself right now, I'm being verbose, you know, means a lot of, but I'm not full of mud, I hope. All right, tide's out, you start to see a lot of shorebirds out there feeding, and here we see one bird with a little bit of water in right now. And when you look at the beak of the avocet, notice it's curved. And if you look at the scientific name, recurvirostra, recurved, rostrum is a beak. It's one definition. And when the tide is out, they can be out there feeding. And what can birds be getting as they feed? You can find the teal out there feeding too. In the mud, there must be something worthwhile other than pure mud. And if the tide is in, you might find the grebes up close. I remember last fall seeing a grebe feeding up in the shallows at the high tide. Man, you should have seen the fish jumping out of the water. My gosh, and those birds can move fast. And let's look at some of the common ducks now, because this is where we're going to concentrate in terms of parasites. You know, you have a worldview when you of the marsh right now. Those of you who have used it, you know, you walk around and you look at a duck in a certain way. But when you leave tonight, you may look at a duck, you may have a different worldview. And some of our ducks. The mallard, the teal, shoveler, the skunk, Surf Scoter, which is a common, like salt water, but I got that one in the clock leg and the bufflehead. And then here's the duck. I've heard this one called a pintail by some people. I've heard another name, splatter, for them. But anyway, you look at the tail, it is pointed. And if you look at the term, the scientific name, oxyura, oxy, sharp, ura, tail. And then I just think of the word oxy, and I think of the element oxygen. And as far as I know, I've never taken in pure oxygen, but oxy refers to sharp, and oxygen has sort of a sharp smell to it. Have you ever seen this bird here? Probably, maybe, I guess not. I haven't. I just have it up here because I was very fortunate down in Petaluma couple of years ago in the winter. My brother brought me out to Petaluma Creek, and there, in the south end of Petaluma, there's an area that had the trumpeter swans. And I got up pretty close to this animal. I got just so close because I think if I got any closer, it would start chasing me.
Have you ever headed to Tule Lake during the winter?
I haven't been to Tule Lake in the winter, but I imagine there they could be rather dense.
Whole islands of...
You know, I've seen them also, swans down at Point Arena, just north of Point Arena on the Garcia River. I've seen them there. I've seen them also at some reservoir just out of Red Bluff on Highway 36 too, in the winter. Now what we're going to deal with are worms, and worms that are parasitic are referred to as helminths. And I taught a course called helminthology years ago. It wasn't parasitology. It generally would cover also other groups of organisms like amoebas and trypanosomes and names like that. And anyway, we find that there are three major groups of parasitic worms. Flatworms called flukes, flatworms called tapeworms, roundworms, and spiny-headed worms. Now what we're going to do is just look at some of these briefly and then go on from there to, okay, pardon me. Here's an example of a fluke. Now notice the size of the animal that I have, 3.2 millimeters. So this is the size that we're generally going to be dealing with, and we use millimeters more than centimeters in terms of size. And you can see certain structures standing out right now. For example, these two things and these things, and this. We'll get into that in a few moments. So there's a fluke. Another major group of flatworms, the tapeworms. The tapeworms have a head, and it's right down here. You can hardly see it, but the worm goes like this, and then like this, and then like this, and then like this. And they're made up of numerous segments, and each segment has a complete reproductive system within it. That could be a group I could deal with at another time. And then we have roundworms, nematodes. Nema means thread. And here's an example out of a brant. The Canada Goose Branta canadensis. And we find that these worms come in males and females, while the flatworms come as male and females typically. And then look at this bit of gut of a surf scoter. Here you see a worm. You can see a dime here to get an idea of the size of these creatures. And they are stuck into the gut of the animal. And these animals lack a digestive tract completely. We find that they're essentially a gut turned inside out. No gut, but their body wall is able to ingest nutrients. Pardon me. Here's an example of one alone. And when we find what makes for spiny-headedness is when we look, and here we find that here's the structure that they attach by, and can't see here, but there's a lot of spines on it, and it's thrust into the mucosa, into the lining, and even deeper, and then the body just soaks it up. But what we're going to do is concentrate on ducks. Now, when I look at a duck, I look at a duck as a system, a setup for worms. We find that there can be worms associated with various organ systems. For example, the gut is the primary one, but there are also other habitats. The respiratory system, the excretory system, and also we can find some that live within the vascular system, within blood vessels. Now here's a nice example of a fluke that lives in the gut. And what we find anatomically, when we look here, you can see here's the head of the worm, and this worm, being an echinostome, is characterized that around the stoma there are spines, and these spines are used to be thrust into the line to hold on to the lining of the gut. And in any event, there are a number of these worms in this family of worms. And then when we look right here, we find there's a sucker around the mouth with spines. There's a sucker here, and these suckers are used to hold the animal in place. Because peristaltic movement is such in the gut, then you can expect the worm to be expended, sent out, if it wasn't attached. So they have to have attachment organs, and we see them here with an oral and a ventral sucker. And then to make the worms so that you can see their parts, there's a technique of staining and clearing the worms and mounting them. And we find that you see the oral sucker or ventral sucker. Then they have a uterus, and the uterus is an area where eggs are stored. And you can see eggs in there, those canned structures. And then notice the word yolk glands. Well, they have, the glands produce cells and serve as nutritive material for the fertilized egg. The egg is produced by the ovary, and then in this area called the ovocyte, we find that the yolk cell, the cells from the yolk gland and the ovary get together, and then a shell is produced around the egg and into the uterus, and then they'll get out up toward the front end. And then also, not only do they have ovaries, they have testes. So they're both male and female, or hermaphroditic, or another word, monoecious. You take the word hermaphroditic, you know what it derived from? Yeah, you can see. What do you recall it? Hermes and Aphrodite. Monoecious refers to one house for both sexes. Oops.
Question, if I may.
Yeah.
I've never heard the term monoecious or dioecious, for
Okay.
that matter, applied to animals before.
Oh,
I've
no.
only heard them used in plants. Is that,
No, it's common in zoology to use the terms. So it's not restricted at all. I've used them for years, and I haven't had anybody, question me about that. But I've used the books, and you can see it. I'm not trying to justify it. I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. But, it's there. It's common language. Here's this worm we saw initially, Echinostoma. Cecal, which refers to naked. The mouth doesn't have the spines, but they do resemble otherwise pretty closely the Echinostomes. And you can see here rather well the testes. You can see the uterus here with eggs within, a ventral sucker and an oral sucker. Rather nicely. And then you can see gut, too, coming like so. I'm fragile. And here you see the yolk glands. And if you get into dealing with flukes, this is the kind of stuff you have to deal with for identifying them, knowing how things are arranged and so on. And anyway, it's made for holding on rather well, as indicated by the suckers. Yeah, here's another kind, very, very flat. And in this case, we can see the testes back here, an ovary here, here are yolk gland. Here's the uterus. Look how much of the area is indicated just in the egg storage. And then out they'll go this way. And notice this one's in a white-winged scoter. Now here's one from the surf scoter. Same species, probably the same species of worm. And then notice that coiled object up front there. This object here is called a cirrus. It's a male copulatory organ. And the cirrus works by eversion. Instead of protrusion, it is everted and goes into the female reproductive system of another worm. Now the thing is, if they didn't have internal fertilization, boy, those sperm going out in the gut would just be food for the host. But they have to put the sperm into a nice area where they will not be digested. Now with this worm, you can see an oral sucker, but there is no ventral sucker. And it's a very, very flat worm, and it probably applies itself to the gut rather closely for hanging on. Yeah, here's one from a Canada Goose. Same general form. The thing is, you see, these worms are not necessarily restricted, a given species, to just one kind of duck or waterfowl. They can be in different ones. And if you look at the areas where these birds may be nesting in the winter, in the summer, a lot of them are nesting in the same general habitats. So they can be open to infection. Now look at this one. Now with this one, you can see right here, an oral sucker. Look where the ventral sucker is, way at the back. This condition is called the amphistome condition. Amphi means double, two, and stone, mouth. This thing has two mouths. And anyway, this one is very, very common in ducks. And here's one. Look at the size of this one. 1 millimeter. That's getting down there. And it has a very, very interesting body in this regard. Here, the oral sucker you can't really make it out well, but it's right about in here. And there's a ventral sucker about in here, but the body is cup-shaped right here. And it's so shaped that the villi, the little extensions from the gut that make for a lot of gut surface, it can catch them like so and hang on to them and have a group of them right in. And they, as far as I know, they can also digest villi. So the host would have to be producing more billy.
Looks like a hand.
Condylarus, cotyl, a cup. And you notice the body cup shape right there. Now now with this one, we can more readily see the oral sucker right up here, and here's the ventral sucker, and then these finger-like projections come out and grab the gut. And they are referred to as trigocytic organs, and tribos, a tribulation, for example, is a bad rub, so to speak. Those structures help to hold on and can abrade gut tissue. Yeah, you can see the eggs right here. What, a little bit over a millimeter, part of less than a millimeter? So an egg can look pretty big, relatively speaking. There's another thing with flatworms. The flattest flatworms are the biggest kinds of flatworms. Flatness goes along with bigness. And the thing is, we find that there are round flatworms. These worms are essentially round. And this goes along with surface to volume relationships. We find that the smaller you get, the ratio of surface to volume approaches unity. But if you plot area against volume, surface to volume, the curve goes like so. So in any event, we don't want to get into that, but we can go for a little bit. And this is a histological preparation such that here's the oral sucker, here's the ventral sucker, and then here's that cup-shaped region with those structures that you can see shown very, very nicely right here. And then the body looks like it's divided into two parts. Okay. Now, let's go to the respiratory system. Now, one feature of birds that we don't have is a system of structures called air sacs. And when you look here, you can see where lung is indicated, and the simple diagram shows these structures called air sacs. Anyway, you can see the lung, and these air sacs come out like so. And the way the mechanics works is that air comes down the trachea, then goes into the air sacs, and then goes through the lungs, and there's some air sacs up front, and then it goes out. So it's pushed, it comes in, and then it goes out through, circulates through these air sacs, and then out. And if there's the way the system is engineered, it's made to get the most out of a breath. With us, air goes in like that. With the bird, there's a better flushing mechanism. And so these air sacs are a feature of birds. And if we look inside the respiratory system, we find that there are two kinds of worms that we can pick up in the birds around here. Now on the left, you see one, and on the right, another. Now the one on the left that you see, this one, has two suckers, an oral and ventral sucker, and it lives in the trachea. Now just think, if you live in the trachea and you have air rushing back and forth, you better be able to hang on or you're going to be coughed out. And so we find that they are powerful worms, and these are strong. I've seen them in a live trachea, and you try to remove them, and boy, those worms can really hang on. And when you look at this worm, you can see the uterus here, and every speck you see in there is an egg. Has a larva in it. And they're being produced by the hundreds or thousands a day, and they're leaving all the time. So what does that mean in terms of what can be in the water where ducks live? It could be just full of eggs of these, and a lot of them can naturally go to the bottom, but we find that they will hatch a little later. We'll get to that when we talk about the biology of the worms. But with this one, you can see the yolk glands right here. Here are the testes. There are numerous testes. An ovary right in here, and then the eggs get into the uterus and will go out. You see the oral sucker, you can't see the ventral. Oh, here's the ventral sucker, right about there. And then you can see gut going like this. See, and on the other side. That's a typical pattern that we find in flukes. Okay, and up close, now just look at that packing of eggs. Orthopedium tracheicula. What does tracheicula indicate to you, just by the name? Whenever I see cola, at the end of a biological term, it usually refers to an inhabitor of something. Cola, like, I know in grapes there's a disease, a fungus, Plasmopara viticola. Vitis is the grape, cola, inhabiting. So the words go together. Now, if we go to the air sacs, we can find this kind of worm. And this one happens to be out of another duck. But in any event, you can see, we take the name Cyclocelia, useful. Here is the oral sucker is up in here, and this is a region called the pharynx, which is used for swallowing, and then here's the gut. Notice that it goes around, cyclic. And then all of this stuff in here is uterus with eggs. Now, this lives in an air sac. The flushing action in the air sac is not that of the trachea. Correspondingly, we find that there's weak attachment in this habitat. And here's one out of a godwit. Same family of worms. And when I look here, I certainly get a good feeling for the fact that reproduction is very, very important. Look at the uterus. Eggs, 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 eggs. So much of their energy goes into producing eggs. And the thing is, when you're dealing with the life histories of these things, you're dealing with a lottery, probabilities. And the probability of an egg giving rise to an adult worm is pretty slim. And then if we go to the excretory system, look at this. We've got two different kinds of worms here. One that lives in the kidney, and you may recall that I just said that cola refers to inhabiting, and ren refers to renal, kidney. And then we have one that also is in the ureter. Now, the one in the kidney, look at the size of that one. 0.8 of a millimeter. You know, that's pretty small. And notice the number of eggs, a bag of eggs. And it has weak connections, suckers. Well, if you're embedded in the kidney, do you have to worry about hanging on? Not at all. Now, this one here lives in the ureter. Now, the ureter isn't a high-energy habitat. It has an oral sucker, but there's no ventral sucker. You can see the gut like so, and like so. And then look at the amount of uterus that shows. Boy, these winged worms have a lot of mass just in terms of egg storage depot. Now, this last worm here is one from the vat circulatory system, but it is not from a duck. But I'm using this as a model. This one's out of muskrat. And we find with the blood flukes that they're dioecious. So we can use that word here. They're males and females. This is rare amongst the flatworms to be separate sex. And what we see is a male right here. And the male has a groove in his body, lower body, and he holds the female within the groove. Let's see. Yeah, just to give you an idea, with this fluke, this is the range in sizes. So we're dealing, when you're living in a vein, you don't want to be too big. But then we have a problem, is trying to get eggs from the vein into the lumen of the gut. We'll probably not get into that tonight at all, but in any event, there's an example in the blood. Now, the thing is, we've seen a lot of eggs, have we not? Chances of an egg becoming an adult are pretty slim. And so anyway, the life, when you take a generalized life cycle of organisms, we start off typically with adults producing zygotes, and then zygotes becoming adults. So zygote life stages, adult, zygote. You've got a circle here. Now you take, with our reproduction though, we have adults, the zygotes are produced, you get one child typically. But when you're dealing with flatworms, what goes on between zygote and adult gets involved. And we find, what we find is here was where snails come into the picture. We find that virtually all the flukes utilize the snail as a host. And so when I see a snail, I often think of flukes, just when I see birds, I think of flukes. And anyway, here's one of the kinds of snails. And the thing is, when you're into parasitology, you not only have to know what the worm is, you got to know what you got it out of. You see, I got a worm out of a duck. To a person who wants to be precise about things, what duck? I don't know. It was a duck. Boy, it's a beautiful slide you made of the parasite, but I don't know where to go with it other than maybe it's out of a duck. Not enough information. So you have to know the hosts. And snails serve as hosts between zygote to zygote. And here's a rather common one. A snail you can get up in the Mad River, and another hot spot is freshwater lagoon. And they're nice and soft, which means that things could penetrate them. Here's another one, a physa, which means a bubble. As far as I go, the sperm whale was physator, right? Right. A blower. By bubble, blow, and so on. Bladder. And anyway, we're going to deal with a generalized life cycle. From adult to adult. Here's a zygote. The model I had, just a simple one. Adults may produce zygotes. Zygotes develop ultimately into adults. But when you're dealing with the flukes, a zygote, it becomes a larva called a mericidium. And it must be very, very small based on what you saw on the size of an egg. And to be fortunate, this stage of mericidium has to get into the right species of snail. And then within the snail, what we find is that there is, the reproduction is asexual, and one larva can be instrumental in the production of a lot of wormy-looking things. And ultimately, the wormy things produce a stage that looks like an adult. Notice the gut, the way it's shaped. Notice here, and you can see a sucker and a sucker, and so on. In any event, to get to this stage, which will then ultimately go into a stage of arrested development, and if this is in a package of food of the given species of worm, and that food gets into the right host, then it can become an adult. But the thing is, you're dealing with probabilities here of 1 over big numbers. And your chances are of a mericidium being able to get to even into a snail, it might be 1 over a huge number. And so will you compensate for it? How? You just produce a lot of that stage. And so there's a lot of this going on. And let's just move on in this series, and we'll be looking at that picture even more. Again, just as a review, notice all the eggs. Lots of them being pumped out. Now here's an egg, and in the egg you can see a larva, the mericidium. And this is the etymology of it from Greek. A human voice. I don't understand what motivates biologists to apply certain names to creatures. But it's like with plants, orchids. You know the basis for the name orchid?
I don't.
That's fine.
Testes, isn't it?
It means a testicle.
Yeah.
Right. So some botanists looked at an orchid and say, boy, that's a nice testicle. In any event, it's interesting how names get applied. Now, when you look at this larva within, you can see a little projection here. Here we find that there are glands that can help the animal digest its way into the host. Now it has to hatch. Here's an example of a mericidium that's hatched. It happens to be that of the sheep liver fluke, which is a veterinary problem here in Humboldt County. But irrespective, I was cutting and pasting with just to put a life cycle together. And you can see that protuberance that you saw on the other slide. And then notice the fuzz around the end. These are cilia. The animal is very, very small, like a ciliated protozoan. And it can swim. And if it's fortunate and finds the right snail, it can then bore in. Now, once it gets in, now here we are, with this, we're here, it's bored in, the lard is bored in. We find that it will convert into a sac-like structure, and within that sac, a lot of structures of the same sort will be developed. And there's a big population of explosion that occurs of another life stage. And this is the innards, some innards out of a snail. Now, you probably have seen a squash snail in your garden and such, and all that brown stuff is called digestive gland. It's around the stomach. And associated here with the brown digestive gland, look at all the spaghetti. And these are a life stage called a sporocyst. So the miracidium converts into a mother sporocyst, which in turn produces many daughter sporocysts. So you get a big explosion of this sort that's in there. And actually, snails can become castrated by the load of parasites that are within them. And here are some sporocysts up close. And with the species we're looking at right now, the sporocysts have within them another stage that they produce. See this thing like so? Let's look at that a little more closely. It's a stage called a cercaria. Here's some cercaria. You can see a tail here, and here's the body. This is the business part that will continue. The tail is only used for locomotion, and most cercaria are swimmers. And so this tail is important as a swimming element. And the name cercaria is derived from Greek kerkos, which is a tail. Now, I would imagine if you were to talk to a European biologist, they'd use the word, say, cercaria, probably. We make this, the K, which has become a C, we Americans, like cerebrum, you know, or I can tell, for example, when I've gone to talk, somebody talked about octopus and such, and it's a Canadian, they don't say cephalopod, they say cephalopod. You know, it's a giveaway, you know, that I know that they're not an American, like that. Okay, and then, myself in the right position. What we find now is the sporocysts, all those bags you saw, strings, are producing things of this sort with a tail. Now this is one root. We're going to get to this root using a frog, a parasite in the red-legged frog. But here the sporocysts produce cercariae, and then we're going to find that the cercariae have to find an intermediate host, something else in which to be contained, which will be the food item that the host eats to produce with the resulting of adults. And what you can see by the term metacercaria, meta, beyond, it's a stage beyond the cercaria that we'll get to. And here's a stage beyond the cercaria that came out of the same snail. And what we find with this species, which we can get up at Freshwater Lagoon, I haven't collected up there in a few years because I don't dare, because I can't collect up there without a permit. You find this stage right here, a metacercaria, and one feature of this metacercaria that it has 4 cup-like elements. And notice how it's reflected right here in the name, tetra, 4, coccyl, cup. In any event, what happens is that the cercariae leave the snail, and then they can bore back into the same snail or other snails. And so they can distribute this infective stage into a number of snails. And therefore, when a duck comes flying in there to Freshwater Lagoon, boy, they can get a load of worms in one, just even out of one snail. So in any event, we find that we've gotten up to right here, and now we want to go to here, and with this certain species, we find this is the species. This little short one that we saw, with a 0.5 millimeter or so, there's the adult Polymorphus. All right, now where do you think I got this picture
Oh, here in our little toad
right
barn?
there yesterday.
Huh.
I don't have a good picture of a red-legged frog, so I said I'll borrow one from the Marsh people. So I went down and photographed the picture yesterday. And you have gotten red-legged frogs here, have you?
Yeah.
Okay, there's some things going on possibly right here in terms of a life cycle, because I've studied mine out of the Essex Ranch in the past. And it's a life cycle of a worm called megalodiscus. Now, when you look at this diagram, what you see is a frog eating tree, make sure.
We know you're just keeping us on our toes.
Well, are you keeping you awake? This
Yeah.
is the most
You're
interesting
keeping
part,
us
isn't
on our
it?
toes.
You gotta use different tricks with different audiences.
Yeah.
Now, here you see the frog eating something. Okay. Now, we find that the parasites use the food chains. We've been seeing that. Now, what's going on? Well, in any event, we find that we have worms that live in the urinary bladder. Boy, that must be irritating. And in any event, the adult worms produce eggs in which Miracidia develop. Miracidia hatch. And notice this is interesting, they show a little lid. You got a lid that'll pop off the egg, and out comes the larva. And what does the larva have to find? It has to find a snail. The right kind of snail. And if you look at this snail, the shell is, the orb is it's a plan orb. It's a flat orb. Like so. In any event, if I saw a little planorbis in the water here, I'd say, hey, we may have it running here. It'd be pretty neat to put some of this stuff together based on what you have around here for science education. And then what we find is that we get a sporocyst which ends up producing a stage which has a gut. You can see a little bit of gut indicated there. And then this stage produces a cercaria, and the cercaria goes and insists on the skin of the frog. And I wonder what the frog is eating. It's a cannibal, in a sense. So let's just move on. Now we need a snail with an orb, a plan orb, flat like this one, but this isn't the species.
What was the frog eating? I thought he was eating a snail.
Huh?
Wasn't the frog eating a snail? Another frog.
Its own skin.
I've got you hooked now. Now you're going to really listen, Elliot. Here we are, adults in the urinary bladder. Live worms right here. The worms do what? What do they produce? They produce eggs. Here's another worm which was stained. And it's like that one worm we saw in the duck with the ventral sucker at the back end. You notice a sucker here, and then there's a sucker here. We have the amphistome condition. And then you can see the gut. And these animals are apparently getting blood out of the lining of the bladder. This looks like blood to me. And then you can see the gut going like that. Well, like that and that. And this is blood congealed within the gut. You see right here. And then eggs are produced. Eggs you can't see too well there, but eggs are produced. So we got a fundamental pattern in the life histories of these. And just in review, we get from there, we get Miracidium within the egg. Miracidium comes out of the egg, has to find the snail. So here we're getting now to this stage right here. It finds the snail. And within the snail, we get a sporocyst that then produces a stage that has a gut. And that gut is indicated right here. A sucker and a gut. And then these are called germ balls, and you see a proliferation beginning right up here, and these get bigger and bigger, and these can get converted into this stage with a tail, the cercaria. And here we find the cercaria, and when they get to the cercaria stage, they're fundamentally juveniles more than larvae, because when you look at them, for example, you can make out an oral sucker, and you can see the ventral sucker. Anytime you are studying cercaria, and well, it takes time to get familiar with these different things, If you see that condition, it's an amphistoma, and it's that members of a certain family. And so now where we are, right here. And notice the arrow. So let's see where the arrow goes. It goes to the skin of the frog. Now when you look at the skin, does it look like it has blackheads or something? As far as I know, frogs don't have blackheads. But what you're looking at is the metacercaria, the stage beyond. And they exist in the skin. And what is a habit of frogs as they grow? They molt their skin. Why waste all that protein? Recycle. And here is a metacercaria within the skin of the frog. And then we find that it has to find its way to the urinary bladder, and we get an adult fluke. And you can see very nicely here in a live fluke, the ventral sucker at the back end, the oral sucker at the front end. You see the gut coming like so, and you can see eggs here within the uterus. And we've completed the life cycle. Let's go to the beach, not too far from here. Some of the birds that are here may end up in the bay. And around, and we find the seagulls. If we did it with Acanthocephala later on, we'll get into these. And in any event, offshore, we have snails in the sand. Now, we don't have this species, but we have a member of the same genus, Olivella, the olive shell. About 8 fathoms of water, we can get a lot of little snails. And what have we found snails doing in terms of fluke life histories? Serving as hosts. And we have host snails offshore there. And we find that in these snails, we may find sporocysts. So these bags that don't have a gut and can produce the tail stage. So you can see some cercariae on the outside there. Here is a cercaria. And when you look at this cercaria, you see the tail, which is typical of cercariae. There are some flukes that do not have a tail that's long. I can show you one that occurs in a little clam out here in the bay, that its tail is more like a sucker. That it doesn't swim, it crawls like a leech. Any event, here's the oral end, here's the oral sucker, and notice this thing sticking out right here. Then we have these cells that stand out beautifully. These are called penetration gland cells, with ducts that come out to that region. And if we look at the head end more closely, notice right here, this is a structure called a stylet. And the stylet can be used to penetrate hard material. Okay, it's going to penetrate hard material that's up on the beach. But if they're produced out there, but they are brought in, and if they're fortunate, they'll be able to use their stylet to go somewhere. And then look at the name, the fancy name, Xiphidiocercaria. As I recall, the scientific name of the swordfish is Xiphias gladius. Xiphias, Greek for a sword, and gladius, think of a gladiator. A gladiolus, flower, a little sword, gladiolus. Gladius is Latin for a sword, and that's where we get gladiator. Okay, we go to the beach. Have you ever seen stuff like this out on the beach? What do you associate with something like this? Have you ever taken one of these mounds of bark? Well, if you do, notice a lot of holes. They have something that might dig back into the sand. A beach hopper. Here's a beach hopper. Now, if we go back to this, here's a stage that can penetrate a beach hopper. It can go to the cuticle that's soft, like at a joint, and bore in. And look at that, we've got the tool there to make the hole, that barb. Here you see it. Now, in terms of where we are in our life cycle, that the cercaria that you can see right here has a stylet, and it has to become one of these. Okay. Here we find one inside the body of the beach hopper. And you look right here, that little mass. There can be a number of them in one beach hopper. That's just a sample out of one beach hopper. So therefore, this creature is lucky that a beach hopper gets eaten by the right bird and becomes an adult within the gut. I know the family that this belongs to, but I'm not sure on the adult. But in any event, we were getting, the amphipods or hoppers are very important in the food chain out there, and the food chain is used to get to the final hosts. And now I can say thank you very much. I hope that you have another world view when you think about snails, think about ducks, think about worms. It's a wormy world we're in, but it is a very beautiful world and a very interesting world. And I get a lot of pleasure out of it. Thank you.
Okay.
So, the questions?
Well, I have one. How much of a load would you say these parasites are on the ducks that we commonly see?
I did a survey with surf scoters. I'm lucky to have people who were hunting. This was back in 1960. I started doing a study on the surf scoter, and I recently looked up a paper on surf scoter parasites that Orchopedium trachea, it wasn't listed. So I made a big discovery years ago. It should be in the paper. But in any event, they can have a big load. But I've seen this, not based on a lot of data, but you get an emaciated duck. What would come to mind in terms of it being a good source of parasites? You might think that it's getting drained of its nutrients because of the parasite load. On the other hand, I don't have lots of data, but from what I've seen, I haven't seen data to refute the fact that a healthy bird can have a big pack of worms. I've seen, for example, the roundworms, the flatworms, tapeworms of different species, flukes of different species in a good healthy bird with a lot of fat. So when I see a good fat load on the bird, that indicates it's probably in a pretty good nutritive state. So that's where I am on that.
Huh?
Yes?
What's the timeline from zygote to zygote?
Oh, well, you take, for example, from zygote to zygote, could be just a matter of weeks. For example, if you start with the egg stage, you can have, I know with some flukes that have been studied very closely, within a couple of weeks or so, you can have cercaria being produced. And for example, with a blood fluke in humans, I remember years ago reading where they just all of a sudden flood the water with cercaria, then they go into a quiet phase, and then they produce a lot again, just like masting in oaks, where oaks all acorns everywhere one year, and then you don't find any trees producing acorns. So they can go through several cycles. And then there's some of these worms that don't live very long too. They might be in there just a matter of a few weeks. But then too, there can be worms that can last a long time. But I don't have really good hard data to share with you on that. Yes?
The little parasite, the blackheads on the frog's skin,
Mm-hmm.
can I get that when I pick up froggies?
You don't look quite right.
No,
No, we find that host specificity is pretty tight. In other words, if it's an amphibian fluke, probably that's where you're going to find it. If it's a fish fluke, and it can be particular to give, depending on different fishes, have different flukes. There's going to be very high overlap in some cases. But you take that Echinostoma that I showed, the original one with the spines around the head of the sucker, well, that one there is known to occur in humans. The thing is, when we start getting into the food chains and start eating things that are exotic, like like sushi, for example, I can get off on that for a moment. With sushi, I remember years ago I used to get a magazine, Parasitology Today, and they had an article dealing with an epidemic of roundworms people were getting in Japan. They were getting it from eating raw fish. And the thing is, the Japanese have been getting it for years. But the thing is, with the development of a tool called the endoscope, the doctor could go down and look. And there's one species that likes the stomach. And some people can eat the sushi or herring. Another thing, there's a condition called herringworm disease, which is, well, some of you ever collected night fish or day fish, you know, on the beach and cleaned them? And if you cleaned them in the, you look at there, you look at the guts and you see all these things going like that, they're roundworms.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that as adults end up in, well, some seabird like a murre or something like that. And in any event, this one species of nematode, of roundworm, that if you eat it, down and go you ingest it, that you can within a few minutes feel something nipping you inside. It's not comfortable. They're there. There's another kind too that ends up down in the intestine. And the one that lives in the intestine, well, it's pretty hard to put an endoscope into a ripe intestine and try to find something in the mud in there, you know. And so in any event, it's a matter of a tool being found, and all of a sudden we have a problem, you know. But our diagnostics has just gotten a lot better. And I remember once, some years ago, this is right before the revolution occurred, when the communism phased out. In the local news, there was something about a news about a Russian fisherman who was brought ashore because he had appendicitis. Well, you saw the paper. And I was working in the Marine Lab at the time, and I got a call from the hospital, Canada Hospital. They said, this lady said to me, "Did you hear about the Russian fisherman who had appendicitis?" And I said, "Yes." He didn't have appendicitis. Okay. But he had worms. And I remember the lady saying to me, I said, "Well, what do you think it is?" She said, "I think it's strongyloides." And I said, "You saw it?" I said, "Nah, strongyloides is microscopic. You couldn't see it." And then I sort of figured she knew what the worm I was going to talk about. I said, "Could it have been a pinworm?" She said, I know a pinworm." And I said, "Okay." And then she said, "We're so interested in knowing what it is, going to a military pathology lab for diagnostics, but we're very interested in getting some sort of information on it. Will you be willing to look at it? And, you know, sort of, the way she put it to me, like, and tell us your truth." And I said, "You get my best shot." Well, you know when you're wanted, because within a half hour, those worms were at the Marine Lab. And I had been out of the lab to come and hear this stuff, and the lady had tried to make mounts out of them, but they weren't very good. And I won't put it on her, because sometimes you can have trouble with these worms trying to see parts within them. And anyway, I looked it over, and I came to the conclusion that he got these worms from eating raw fish. And I remember phoning the hospital, and I said, "I know how to say in Russian, 'Do you eat fish?' but I don't have the word for raw." She said, "Oh, we got an interpreter." That's funny. And so anyway, they went and asked the patient if he ate raw fish. And he said, "Yeah, he didn't eat raw fish, he ate pickled fish." And I said, "Pickling's not doing it." It's like the kippering process. It wasn't killing worms. And then they came and picked up the worms. I had a handwritten note. And then they sent them to the lab, and the military lab, reported back they could put them in the family, which is the best I could do. And I can recall, I said, "I'd like to talk to the surgeon who worked on the patient." And anyway, the next day I got a phone call from Dr. Holmes, who was a major surgeon here in the area at the time. And he says, "Yeah," he says, "you know, we found these worms." He said they were in the body cavity. They had perforated the gut. He said, "I had to do a bowel resection on the patient." And he says, "We checked the stool for eggs." I says, "Well, I don't expect you to find eggs, because typically these kind of worms do not become sexually mature in humans." And so anyway, about a month later, they had a case study situation there, and I was invited to come down and talk about the biology of worms. And I can remember Dr. Holmes talking about the operation, and then Dr. pathologist talking, he had histological preparations, and you could see in mesenteric fat, you could see worms in the fat. And in some cases, you could see where the leukocytes had digested the worms. But there were some cases where the sections through the worms were so beautiful that you could use them for a histological study of the body wall, the cross-section of a roundworm. The organs were in beautiful shape, but no reproductive system showing, you know. And in any event, I remember having another case involving salmon with a hospital down in Fortuna. Cook your fish. Pasteurizing doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt at all. Yes.
What is the family of worms that'll jump from fish to humans?
Family? Well, those are, in terms of this food chain,
Yeah,
Anasacidae.
Acanthocephala.
Yeah.
Oh,
Anisacus, which that means is and not. Ice saying, acus means points. And the front end doesn't look like the back end, so they're Anisacus.
Oh, okay.
And there are other genera too within the family.
Seems like I've heard of a name for these worms, but it wasn't that one.
Contrasecum is one name.
Hmm.
And, there's some others. There are quite a few in the family.
Okay.
I'm a little cold on them, but you can get these worms out of MERS. I used to collect dead MERS and look at them. One time I had a permit from the feds. And boy, some of our offshore birds, I mean, some of the parasites in the fulmar, for example, the tapeworms and the roundworms, some of the flat roundworms, because one species has just such an ornate front end for holding on within a gut. A lot of real neat stuff out there. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.